Photogenic setup for sure.
Oh, it's just it would be weird if a person who, worked professionally in photography didn't know how to set up a camera for this. So,
well, I'm just giving it the proper recognition that it's due. It looks
thanks. Great. Casey was just really excited about my tool wall being finished for this.
Yeah.
Oh, is it cloudy outside? Is it nice out? It's really pretty out here today. So
we have rain, a lot of rain.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey,
Hello.
Luke, how you doing?
Hello.
What's up, everyone?
Everyone, I think my students will be here in just a couple minutes. Welcome. I sent everyone, I hope I tagged everyone with the link for the YouTube streaming. Hello.
hello.
All right. Hello. I've seen an alumni. Hi, Atticus. Hello.
Now I can.
All right. Hello. Hello to everyone. Well, so Grace, can you just start letting everyone in now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And we will get going.
The guy from Chicago.
All right. So as students come in, and everyone please mute if you can. We're just doing the Zoom protocols. If you have a cat, dog, child, that would help. So wonderful to see everyone's faces. All right, I'm going to switch to my view and let's get this going. All right, welcome to the MMA AU Media Panel that is taking place here on March 23rd, 21, and everything will be taken care of that. First, I want to talk about the first panel. When we gathered for the first MMA Media Panel on December 6th, 2019, it was also a celebration of how far the sport and this coverage has come over the past 26 years. No longer confined to the underground space of blogs and chat threads, MMA journalists, writers, and broadcasters were now in the show, providing content for major publications and innovating new mediums, such as podcasts, YouTube channels, subscription publications, all this to tell your stories. Obviously, none of us knew that in just a couple months, every major sports organization would temporarily go dark due to the COVID-19 pandemic. No upcoming events, no training camps, no interviews. We'll talk about how the MMA community reacted and adapted to this unprecedented change in the sports world, and how we're returning to normalcy or making a space in between. We'll also discuss the UFC's relationship with ESPN now that 2 years have passed, gender discrimination, sports betting, and media, and much more. And as you guys hear, that is our class coming together. We have some late students arriving. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about our chair. Tanisha Singleton actually has a sick puppy. So my thoughts go to Tanisha, but I also have my other co-chair, Julie Kedzie. Julie, can you say hello?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Nancy. And It's really nice to see all your faces. Community.
Yes. Thank you, Julie. And this is a team effort. Just to remind everyone who, if people don't even need to know this, but she made history when she fought Gina Carano in the first televised female MMA fight on February 10th, 2007. A highly successful UFC fighter. I'm always going to say that, Julie. She is the color commentator for Invicta Fighting Championships. A graduate from the University of Indiana with a degree in English, Julie recently received her master's in fine art and creative writing at the esteemed Iowa's Writing Workshop, where she's also was a professor of writing, and she's currently finishing her first book, as well as more writing and other projects. So thank you, Julie. Myself, I am Nancy Kidder. I'm a writer and professor based in Washington, D.C. I'm an English graduate of Duke University, and I received my MFA in creative writing from American University, where I teach writing and fighting, a course that uses combat sports as a vehicle to explore the rhetorical structures of fiction and nonfiction. My students also examine culture, race, gender, and the human condition through a sport that juxtaposes unrelenting aggression with heroic fortitude. And I've also am a consultant for Books at Work, but I am more so than anything, I am so privileged to be here, bringing this esteemed group of individuals together to talk about issues that are important using the lens of academia as we go through. So we're going to divide this up. Julie, I'll start off, and I'm going to talk about DC's own Luke Thomas. Luke, can you say hello?
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good day.
Wonderful. Luke, you are at CBS Sports and Showtime. A graduate of College of William and Mary, Thomas reached the rank of sergeant in the Marine Corps. Thomas has been part of the MMA media since 2006. He currently hosts the YouTube series Morning Combat for Showtime and his own YouTube channel that has 150,000 subscribers. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Brett Akamoto, excuse me. Can you please say hello?
Yeah, hey Nancy, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Brett joined ESPN in 2010, where he is a breaking news reporter, feature writer, analyst, and a one-on-one interviewer for MMA content across linear and digital platforms. Akamoto graduated from Colorado State University and previously covered sports for Sports Illustrated, CNN.com, and the Las Vegas Sun. Thank you, Brett.
Of course.
All right. Going back to DC, we have Charles DeGisco. Can you say hello?
Hey, everybody. Great to be here.
A 2014 alum of American University, Charles has already participated in the MMA world in a multitude of ways. He's worked for several promotions, including Combate, Pagezilla, and is currently the play-by-play commentator for Donald Cowboy Cerrone's Cowboy Fight Series, which is a local DC amateur promotion. Along with a day job as a consultant at Lynch, DeGisco owns District Martial Arts and MMA gym in Arlington, Virginia. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We also have Esther Lynn. Esther, can you wave, please?
Hello.
Thank you. Esther, an award-winning sports photographer who has shot for MMA fighting and Showtime. She's responsible for capturing such iconic images as Holly Holm's head kick on Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather's face-off. And just a day after the first MMA media symposium, she captured Alistair Overeem's grinning, severely busted lip, one of the most surreal photos I've seen in MMA or boxing. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Julie, do you want to take the...
Sure, I won't make you do all the talking. I would like to introduce Josh Rosenblatt. Josh, can you wave at everybody?
Hey everyone.
I hope I have this right side up. Josh, author of Why We Fight, a 2019 biography, as well as a physical and philosophical, I'm so sorry, I need a drink of water, philosophical meditation on why humans are drawn to fighting. A graduate of Wesleyan College, Rosenblatt's work has appeared in Vice, Texas Observer, and the Austin Chronicle. Between 2012 and 2014, he was editor-in-chief of Fightland, Vice Media's mixed martial arts publication, and my editor there too.
That's right.
To see you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Dan Stupp, I hope it's Stupp and not Stoop.
It's stop.
Sorry, I like read, but then I don't listen. For a commentator. Dan Stupp currently writes for Play Virginia, providing sports betting content coverage, a rapidly increasing segment of MMA media. Dan graduated from the University of Missouri Journalism School and later worked as creative services manager for the Cincinnati Reds before devoting himself full-time to MMA. Dan co-founded MMA Junkie, an online website, in 2006 and later sold the publication to USA Today, where he continued as editor-in-chief until 2018, where he was the editor of MMA Sports at The Athletic until June of 2020. I'm sorry, I didn't edit my own document. And I have questions for you about betting, but we can take that out of the introduction. So, Dan. Laura Sanko. Hi, Laura.
Hey.
Laura Sanko, one of the sweetest people in the entire universe, currently works as a UFC on ESPN reporter and commentates for Legacy Fighting Alliance, and has commentated, or I don't know what's going on with the Phoenix series. So Invicta Promotions Phoenix.
No more than I do.
As Invicta commentator as well. After graduating from William Jewell College, Sanko had a brief career in the corporate world before becoming a professional MMA atomweight fighter. She was a badass. Sanko would later transition to the broadcast side, working at Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender series and Fox News, and later ESPN, where there is much speculation on her next transition. And cheering for that UFC seat for her. Fernanda, am I saying this right? Fernanda Pracis. I think I've done that every single time
That was good.
Fernanda Pracis has an amazing podcast, which is hilarious. Currently writes for Fanbite Media and hosts the Best Camp of My Life podcast, formerly out of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and now based in Mexico City. Pracis worked as a TV producer for Sport TV, Combat, as well as reporter for MMA Junkie and most recently The Athletic, and is recently engaged. Congratulations.
Thank you. Aw, no,
I think that's what
Yes, that's the panel.
Okay.
Not bad, huh? Yes, thank you, Julie, so much. Now I am going to go through, Julie and I are going to tag team it here. And we're going to ask questions to the panelists. We're going to ask it specifically, based on their background, expertise, vocation. But then after we ask it, please, I want you guys to chime in and let's open it for discussion. All right, so let's get started. I'll take the first one, and Luke, you're up. Okay. We talked about COVID, but I think that's going to be simmering in the background of all of these discussions. So we're actually going to start with something I'm very interested in your thoughts: cancel culture and the MMA community. So back in September, Colby Covington made statements that many characterized as racist after his TKO of Tyron Woodley. While several sponsors denounced his remarks, the UFC did not address this incident, nor did it ask Covington to apologize. In February, former MMA fighter and actress Gina Carano was fired from the production house behind The Mandalorian for her comments that many characterized as extremist, and her refusal to apologize. What is your view of cancel culture in MMA and the community, and why are some censored and others not?
Jeez, that is not a small question. Okay, so let's see if we can parse this out here a little bit. I'll start with the second part first, which was about Gina. I would say that there is cancel culture inside of MMA, but it doesn't map onto the wider cancel culture. In other words, like some of those same kinds of mob mentalities and pushback against some kind of perceived awful idea. These dynamics exist, just not along the same kinds of lines. But as relates to Gina, I would say, like, I did not find her firing to be really a strong argument for cancel culture. It wasn't that you wish for people to lose their job, or that all of us felt whatever she said with the same degree of sensitivity, but she was promoting, to a degree, or at least tacitly endorsing, conspiracy theories about the election that were demonstrably false. I mean, these are not even questions about political sorting. These were vetted in the United States courts, and it was resoundingly shown to not be at all, there's nothing to it. And she was sort of aping arguments about that. And if that's drawing negative attention to your business, I would actually want to live in a country where a employer has at least the rights to part ways with someone under those circumstances. That's loony. But the problem is inside of MMA that like that kind of thing is not cancelable because it's somewhat mainstreamish among power players. Like it's a completely different set of criteria once you begin to ask inside of the sport, what is cancelable and what isn't. And you saw a lot of media getting pushback for endorsing ideas in MMA about Gina Carano being, justifiably fired. I would say inside the sport, you've got a certain degree of right-leaning politics that tends to drive a lot of certainly online discussion. I don't know how much in the real world, but certainly online, it tends to be a major influencing factor. And so I tend to think that if you're looking for cancel culture fault lines inside of MMA, they much more closely map alongside a little bit of right-wing grievance politics. It tends to follow that a little bit more. They're a lot more mad at LeBron than they are at Gina, kind of a scenario. And so I think if you begin to understand it on those terms, a lot of it makes more sense. But you should also know, like in some of the things that Colby has said, listen, I'm a 41-year-old white dad. I'm probably not going to be the person that's going to best address that situation. But I would say that on one level, you do have to allow for some latitude for people to be mean to each other. But then it gets to a point where under that basic guideline, you can sort of do this if the fans and then the third-party players here, your Monster Energies, your ESPNs or whatever, if they don't really care about that kind of stuff either, you begin to report on it. People are like, why are you even talking about this? It's like a total disconnect between, I think, media and the rest of the audience there. So I think that second part is probably better answered by somebody else. But I think a shift in understanding about what the fault lines are here helps you to better appreciate it.
No, thank you. Does anyone, I appreciate what you're saying about who has the right to say mean stuff and when can you say mean stuff? Does anyone else want to chime in on this point? Because it is something that has, gotten a lot of attention. I think you said it all, Luke. No one wants to go after.
If that was long, I apologize.
I think, like, what other argument? I think you said it well. So, Luke, actually, I'm going to take just a second to ask. We're going to go into COVID. Obviously, COVID-19 created an unprecedented crisis for live sports. Almost overnight, borders, mass transportation, crowds, schools were closed. And many questioned how sports would continue if physical contact, especially outside of 6 feet, was now prohibited. We are now 13 months later. How well did the UFC and MMA community react?
I think, there's probably a couple stories to tell. I think, if you're looking at the more day-to-day picture that we live in today, I would say that there's a lot that could be positively said about the MMA community and UFC in particular. They are, many organizations from the regional side are a little bit kind of back on their feet. Grabaka Hitman on Twitter has a lot more to talk about these days, it seems, which is always a good thing. And you're beginning to see pieces of those kinds of organizations come back and find some kind of workable model. Obviously, it's not what it once was, but that's a tale of resilience to me. I think if you look at the fighters who have been traveling all over the world in any organization, to do media or fights, I think that they have risen to the occasion, and their coaching staff and everybody else. Like, I think that there's a real story to be told here about MMA finding real success in this moment. I do. And UFC in particular, they had a tremendous year when it was all said and done. So I think in terms of managing government responsibility, COVID protocol, keeping themselves healthy, everyone's more or less, I think, doing the best that they can. And to the extent that MMA has had any success in this very challenging times is a testament to the resilience of the people who are making it happen. I think that's what I would say first. But there's just no denying, Jesus Christ, the pandemic was a very revealing moment for me, and I think for everybody else, about what people really believed about how the world works, about how society should function, about what's an acceptable level of risk. And certainly, I don't think that any one group has all the right answers, but I do think that it fell a lot along people who had power and or a stake in continuing things, spouting and espousing and sharing deep scientific illiteracy, at least the best risk assessments that we had at the time. And And I think it drove a fault line between media and the audience for a time. I think it was a fault line between media and promoters and a lot of other folks. And again, it cuts a lot of different ways. But that was I think that's one of the most transformative moments of my career in 15 years in terms of how I saw who I was surrounded by. And I'm sure they probably felt the same based on some of the things I've said, but which is okay. But that was strange.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone has been touched by COVID. Does anyone want to share? And I appreciate Luke. Please just talk. This is, I almost want to call this a roundtable, please. So what else did people feel about how the reaction and adaptation that this industry did?
Well, I will say that am I unmuted? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
As someone who fell in love with watching the sport and then stupidly fell in love with doing this sport, COVID left us in a terrible position in that I'm completely addicted to training and sparring and extreme physical intimacy to get my exercise in. And that running around in circles and doing push-ups is a terrible substitute for fighting. And so I will simply say from a personal standpoint, my relationship with MMA, it's not being able to do it for a year has just been miserable. It's just been awful. I swear, if I have to run around in a circle one more time without punching something or getting punched by something, I'm going to be very upset.
Yeah, no, and we're going to talk about that later too. I have some questions about, what this hole that's created by this pause, this over-year pause in training and in kind of, where some people have been able to do it, but some haven't, or people have been pushed ahead. So we're going to talk about that. Just because I know we have more panelists to get to, Julie, take us from here.
Oh, okay. I have a lot of opinions about COVID, but later on, maybe we'll get into that. So Brett Okamoto, and I said that right, Okamoto, right?
It is actually Okamoto.
Okamoto, I am so sorry. Ask Fernanda. I'm going to get it wrong.
You hear Okamoto as much as Okamoto, so it's nobody knows.
Okamoto, long O. Well, you've worked at ESPN since 2010. January 19th, 2019 marked the first UFC event on the ESPN broadcasting network with UFC Fight Night 143 taking place. Their new subscriptions are on their new subscription service, ESPN Plus. Many viewed this as a move from Fox Sports Network as a sign of the UFC's arrival as a mainstream sport. I'm going to edit this question a little bit just out of my own curiosity. Do you feel, part A of this question, do you feel this is a mainstream sport now? Are we competitive with soccer and MMA right now? I mean, that was kind of the high watermark or whatever was competing with soccer. So that's part A. But only a handful of fights would later be shown on the ESPN cable channel, big ESPN. So, the question was, would the fans make the leap to online only content? Was there enough? Is there enough content to fulfill the extended fight contract? And what were your predictions on that? And what do you think, have things worked out the way you predicted in terms of UFC as a mainstream sport being pushed through online channels?
Okay, well, to start off, is mixed martial arts a mainstream sport? To me, it kind of falls under this weird category of where it is mainstream and it's still niche. And what I mean by that is that the big fights break across undeniably into the mainstream. I mean, I don't even think that that's debatable at this point. I think that, this tired comparison of it between boxing, I don't like to go to it, but it is easy. It's right there. It's kind of lazy of me to do it, but it has sort of replaced or at least joined boxing in that regard, where if it's a big fight, non-MMA fans know about it and they want to watch it. And I think that that has been the case for a long time, even going back before ESPN. But I think the ESPN partnership has made that more pronounced. You know, I think that you can feel it more with ESPN, just because it is ESPN. Those 4 letters are just very, very synonymous with mainstream sports, and just their ability to get in front of and get the sport in front of eyeballs. And that would then, that would lead into your second question of, you know, my predictions of when it went to ESPN and have they played out, you know, to what I thought. I think that the biggest, when the UFC went to ESPN, I don't think anybody looked at that and said that could be anything other than a good thing. You know, I think that from an exposure and from a legitimacy standpoint, and just the way that that ESPN covers sports on its various platforms, not only just bringing them exposure, but the way in which they cover them, that the conversations that they have, they tend to go out and find the right people to cover them, that was going to be a great thing for the sport. I think everybody would have unanimously said that. I think the question, or if there was any, not even concern, but it happened in April of 2019 when they decided to take the pay-per-views and put them all on ESPN Plus and no longer have them on cable. That to me was the one moment, and it wasn't just me. I know that there were a lot of people in the sport, the fighters included, that were going to be headlining these pay-per-views. They were saying, man, we're changing the whole purchasing model now of buying a pay-per-view. I thought that was super interesting. It was a big move by ESPN Plus. It was a move that I personally didn't see coming, that it was going to happen just bam overnight like that. And I think that the rollout had, I wouldn't even say kinks, but the rollout had maybe kinks, you know, and maybe some of them were technical and some of them were, you know, the effort to educate people that this was now, you know, the one spot, at least in the United States, where you had to go to buy a pay-per-view. And I think that was a gamble that both sides took. I think for sure it was a gamble that ESPN took. But looking back on it, it just really shows the level of commitment and the level of value that ESPN saw in mixed martial arts, which I think everybody on this panel would agree is a great thing for ESPN to see that amount of value in a sport that has, you know, historically fought for to be in the mainstream. For ESPN to see it in that light was a very positive thing. And now we've seen that the partnership between the sport and ESPN is actually a pretty perfect one, in my opinion. And it's because the sport caters to a young crowd. The sport caters to an online audience. And ESPN has shown a remarkable ability, and I'm not just saying that because I work for them. ESPN has shown a remarkable ability to get this thing in front of people's faces. I mean, you turn on your phone around a UFC pay-per-view and you were just bombarded with it, almost to the point of like, enough already. And it is a lot, but it's a good thing. It's a great thing. That's something that I think the sport had missed, you know, in prior years, whether it was the UFC or really anybody else, is that they had good partners along the way. But I don't think they've ever had a partner like this, where you can have a regular sports fan who has no idea about 90% of the things that we'd bring up when it comes to this sport, and yet they will know that Stipe Miocic is fighting Francis Ngannou this weekend. You know, so I think that the partnership has actually been better and exceeded any expectation that I had. And there were some times where you wondered if there was going to be some hiccups along the way, but for the most part, I mean, in the beginning of 2021, in January, the numbers were put out on ESPN Plus, and they have 12 million subscribers now on ESPN Plus. That is a phenomenal number. And I think the UFC has had a lot to do with that. And it's, I think if you would go back to 2019 when they all started this, I think that they all would have been very happy with, if you would have told them that this is what it would look like 2 years from now, I think they all would have been pretty happy with it, ESPN and UFC.
I have a quick follow-up here. So if there was one adjustment you could make, a positive adjustment, you don't have to rag on anything, but if there was one positive adjustment you personally could make, what would it be? What would the ideal Brett Okamoto adjustment to the ESPN platform, or the partnership between the UFC and ESPN be?
I think for me, the biggest one would be to not only give the platform to the established stars, it would be to give the platform to the stars that are up and coming. And ESPN does do that from a sense of putting out features on guys that they think are coming up, you know, and the video content around the actual fights is tremendous, and you know, just educating people about the individuals that are going to fight. I've always thought that this sport thrives the most, of course, when you know the stories behind the athletes that are competing. And I think ESPN has done that, but you know, they do the sort of big corporation type thing sometimes, where they're set in their ways, and that they won't give that UFC Fight Night main event guy that 3 minutes on a big platform just yet, because they're like, well, you know, we don't know about this guy, and it's like, well, that's going to change, you know, and eventually this guy could be a really big star that you want to have on a platform like First Take. So I would like to just see maybe a little bit more, you know, willingness to just take the plunge and talk to some of these guys that maybe the producers of the show don't know yet, and they look at their Instagram followers and are like, this guy's not a superstar yet, but hey, he's got a great story to tell, so we're going to give him that platform, and we're going to continue to build guys that way instead of always just going for the top stars. But really, I mean, there's not too many things to complain about. I think ESPN has taken this sport very serious. I think that, you know, obviously the UFC's aggressiveness to continue putting on cards last year when nothing was going on helped that. It really helped like educate the few remaining producers that really weren't into the UFC. They had to get into the UFC because they had nothing else to put on their shows. And so now that has stayed with them in 2021. So there's really not too much to complain about. I think that ESPN is treating the sport with a lot of respect, which is obviously great for me to see.
Opening this up, I guess, if that's what you'd like to do, Nancy, to
Yeah, no, well, yeah, why don't we take this? I have a question, maybe to Brett or to other people. Is there the thought that because we didn't have concerts and we didn't have anything else to do but stay at home and watch subscription, I mean, did in fact COVID really help the UFC? Is that, I don't know if that's morbid to ask.
Yeah, I'll go quick because I might even end up taking more time than Luke Thomas, which I never would have thought could have been the case with that guy. But so I'll be very quick. I think absolutely, yeah. I think that helped the subscriptions to Disney Plus as well. I mean, Disney Plus just, yeah, the success of Disney Plus has been tremendous, and ESPN Plus as well. So yeah, I think that COVID certainly helped that. But I also think it's just consuming. People are getting used to consuming streaming content, and they're getting used to paying for it. So, and UFC and ESPN have kind of helped sort of lead the way on that. So, and I think that that's only going to continue.
Luke, do you have anything to chime in?
Oh, Brett, you might have beaten me. I don't know. That was pretty close. We were gabbing it up.
I do have a comment, I guess. I did notice that most people have been, you know, there's the trend towards cord cutting had already started long before COVID, you know, hit our shores. So to that effect, I feel like it was actually kind of perfect timing for UFC and ESPN to kind of transition to what they were doing because of that fact. People are already trying to figure out how to just get their content through streaming, maybe, you know, DirecTV and other satellite services were getting kind of expensive. And actually, for me, the biggest point for the UFC, I think, is moving their stuff to maybe moving the pay-per-views to ESPN Plus. I'm curious how much larger the revenue share is now that they don't have to split it with, you know, satellite providers and cable providers and, 20 other sources.
It's a great question. Yeah, no. And I also want to kind of dig into that more, Esther. And actually, Julie, I'm going to take Esther now, if that's cool with you, because I have two very different questions that I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
But one, I have to, because being a fight nerd in this community of someone who overthinks mixed martial arts and boxing, when back in the fall of 2020, when the announcement of your retirement was made, you made it on MMA Fighting. I saw that there was a Reddit thread that racked up 150 comments. You had the most comments, I think, on that MMA Fighting post. I would call it an outcry about this. And could you just kind of, now 6 months later, I know it was about your inability to go to live shoots and concentrate on other projects, but there was also some negativity in the social media of MMA. What is your perspective 6 months later?
Oh, well, 6 months later, I'd say that my perspective hasn't really changed too much, but it has broadened in the sense that I don't think it's limited to MMA. I don't think a lot of the negativity of social media I think it's just the whole world. I think that we've been working towards this. There's a lot of factors in play beyond, the slow erosion of our reading comprehension skills to, there's a lot of things where, we became the algorithms just kind of serve us what we want to see. So slowly you're kind of siloing yourself from the rest of the world the more you spend time online, in some cases, depending on what kind of habits you have. So 6 months later, I would say that it hasn't necessarily changed too much. I always feel kind of guilty because I listen to Nanda's podcast every week, and I feel so guilty whenever somebody refers back to me quitting because of how negative the MMA world was. And then they start talking about like all of the terrible comments they get and stuff. And I didn't mean to make it a dominant conversation, but I think part of it is that in some ways I was really hoping that we would transition towards more empathy towards the fighters, towards the media, towards everyone that actually works in this. Same with, how we were talking about COVID earlier, and there was that kind of wedge between media and fans thinking that media, we were trying to cancel all the events or this or that. It's like, no, we just care very much about the safety of the fighters, and we want them to be able to do this in the future. And if I have to wait a year to go see a live event so that none of the fighters end up with, long haul COVID and, long-term effects, I'm okay with that. I would actually rather wait than rush into something and have people with permanent, damage or injuries. So it's kind of been a weird thing. I do miss it, and I still end up tuning in a lot to watch it. And then obviously my husband works in the same business, so it's hard to avoid. But I've really valued my free time, and I've valued getting to kind of like look outside of it and I do see that it's not just MMA that has this kind of negative culture around it. I just think it is just kind of how everyone's feeling right now.
Yeah. No, thank you. And Julie, do you want to go ahead with Laura?
Julie. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. You should have chosen me as a co-host. Okay. Okay, so Laura, it's nice to talk to you again. So I wanted to ask you, as somebody also affiliated with ESPN, and basically a rising notable human being in the world of I guess media, in a sense. I think, it's a hard, media is such an all-encompassing term, but anyway, I'll move on from that. So yesterday, ESPN's Mark Rinaldi published an article chronicling unforeseen success of the UFC Apex, a newly built space originally suited for smaller in-house events, such as the Contender Series or the Ultimate Fighter. Yet with COVID-19, it would go on to host 28 UFC events, including major pay-per-views, making it the third venue behind MGM Grand and Mandalay Bay for hosting the most UFC events. Will the UFC Apex continue to hold major events in the future, or was it just kind of the lucky bunker for an unprecedented moment in sports? And I know you in particular spent a lot of time there and worked there, so I feel like this is something you could really weigh in on.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that the Apex ended up being, sort of Noah's Ark in the COVID era a little bit. And I don't know at the time, I mean, certainly they couldn't have known at the time that would be as important as it ended up being. But it's been pretty incredible to see just what a foundational piece it is to the UFC operation as a whole now, and not just the media, but for the fighters as well, because there's sort of this secondary apex there that allows even more fighters to travel in and train at the PI and not have to train against or train next to their opponents. All of these things that it affords, but certainly from a broadcasting perspective, it's a perfect home for so many things. And it was literally designed from day one to do these things. And now, just with them launching the studio in the last couple months, I think that the content that you're going to see coming out of the Apex is just going to grow and grow and grow. And I think, as Brett spoke about before, that relationship with ESPN is so intertwined and synergistic. And it's almost to the point where, like, in my specific role, which is also Brett's specific role, sometimes it's almost like confusing. People think I work for ESPN. I don't work for ESPN. I don't consider myself a journalist, but I am, I guess, a media member. But to go back to your original question, the Apex has been, and I think will continue to be, very important for shows like Dana White's Contender Series, The Ultimate Fighter, which I know is going to be returning very soon here. But for big events, I don't think so. We have missed fans, and I know the UFC has missed having a gate. There's no doubt about that. So I do think that, now with this first show scheduled in Florida, which I'll be a part of that, I'm excited to go down there and kind of return to the first place we went to after we were able to get out of the COVID nightmare a little bit. I think that as more and more states and cities afford full audiences, I think the pay-per-views will continue to stay on the road, but I think fight nights will be at the Apex for quite a while longer, because as you can see with the production level, the three-dimensional graphics that they do, all of the elements that have been added to the production are really not necessarily unique to the Apex, but the facility has allowed them to sort of experiment with new cameras and new graphics and new ways to do things that then we can later carry on as we go on the road. But yeah, it's been amazing. It's a state-of-the-art facility, and man, great timing on building that thing. I guess that sums it up.
And switching tracks just a little bit here, as somebody who's very high profile now and whose star is rising.
How about that?
We had the panel, the gender and combat sports panel
last
year, and points were raised about the expectations of women in broadcast sports and pressure to meet high levels of expectation. Do you feel extra pressure? Do you see extra pressure influenced on your fellow female colleagues? And is I to the extent that, like, you're at the Apex Center so much, I mean, do people, I don't know, do they associate you now with, I don't know exactly how I'm trying to phrase this because I went off my cheat sheet, but I guess what extra pressures are you feeling right now? Or are you feeling extra pressure? Are you seeing extra pressure exerted on your fellow female colleagues? And how does that play out in these kind of, even though it's not as contained, it's a fairly contained setting?
Yeah, I think this, regardless of the setting, I think kind of with what your question started with, I don't know. I have kind of a unique perspective in that I don't really fit into any box neatly, which is cool. And I kind of feel like I can be this sort of utilitarian, like, she can kind of do this, she can kind of do that, but, like, we're not sure if she's great at it. If she's great at anything. So, like, that part of it is neat, but then there's kind of what you started out with. Is there extra pressure being a woman talking about combat sports? And I certainly think when you're placed in roles, whether it's color commentary or when they're specifically referring to you as an analyst, there can be. I think it was an interesting transition going from doing commentary alongside you in Invicta, a fan base that not only knew me as a fighter, but knew me as a beginning reporter. And, like, it was like my hometown, right? And as you well know, Julie, women's MMA fans, that niche part of MMA, they tend to be kinder anyway. And it's sort of like a you can do no wrong scenario. And so when I had this chance to start working with the LFA recently and doing commentary there, the first time I would be calling men's fights, man, did I feel it all of a sudden. Not because I would be saying anything different. The fights are the same. It's not any different. It's not a different skill set, but it's definitely a different fan base. And so, yeah, I did feel a lot of pressure. I felt nervous to not say the wrong thing, even though I know what I'm talking about and I know I'm fully capable of it. I will say that what has helped me is, I guess, borrowing credibility from male cohorts when it makes sense. And I guess by that I mean, and Luke Thomas is probably the best example that comes to my mind as the first person to, publicly and proudly say, "Man, I think that Laura Sanko's got a real head on her. She knows what she's talking about. She can really break down a fight." And then, maybe someone else says it that is also already seen as a credible entity in the sport. And slowly but surely, because I don't have a fight resume that speaks for itself, and I don't have that shiny UFC belt that I would love to have had, of course. It's been an interesting journey for sure. It's still an interesting journey, and I'm loving every minute of it. But yeah, it's there's definitely a level of pressure, and I think the only way to combat that is to just be confident in yourself and be incredibly, incredibly prepared, and know that not everything is going to be perfect, and that's okay. But the pressure is different in each role, and it was funny because I'm looking at Brett right now. Brett, when you filled in and did I shouldn't say filled in, when you had the role that Megan O'Levy and I have as well, when you were on Fight Island, it was like, Brett's pretty, but is he pretty enough? There's almost like this expectation that the reporter has to be a girl, right? And that the analyst probably should be a guy. And yet, when we see people mixed in these roles, it's just fascinating to see fans' reaction. But I would argue that you're plenty pretty and certainly very, very good at what you do, Brett.
I have a quick follow-up question, although I love that you called him pretty. In terms of environment, I guess, and containment, are you seeing, because even though the UFC has broadened out and it's not just this contained COVID space, and I shouldn't call it COVID space exactly, but I can't quite find the words for
bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you seeing other female analysts, possible commentators, people who are looking up to you? Are you seeing pressure put on them? Are there other women coming up? And do you feel the pressure to represent for them?
Yeah, well, definitely. I certainly think there are. I mean, there are a lot of women in the sport capable of speaking about it eloquently and in doing similar things to what I'm trying to do. I'm certainly not the only one trying to do or wanting to do or capable of doing some of these analyst things, whether it's, eventual commentary, whatever the case may be. Pressure put, I don't know about pressure necessarily. I do think it's just different waters to navigate, a lot different waters to navigate. And I think that there's a thought that if you have fought, that you're always really good at communicating it, or if you're good at communicating and fighting, that you can kind of back it up. So it's this weird dynamic of, can you be good enough at all of those things and be authentic and be engaging? And, yeah, I suppose there is pressure, but I welcome it. And I know the other women that are doing this job and similar jobs welcome it as well. So.
Hey, Julie, can I ask Laura a question real quick?
Go for it.
Thanks. Laura, I was curious about if you have heard anything about or any rumblings about current women fighters doing color commentary the way Dominic Cruz does or Paul Felder. Is that going to be a thing? Is there talk about that? It seems strange that that's never happened.
Yeah, I certainly haven't heard talk about anyone specific or really that topic in general. I will say this. I will say, because I've obviously put it out there, and I realize that I'm aware that in many ways it's kind of a long shot, and like it doesn't make sense on some level, and I do understand that. But I will say that like the pushback that I have heard from the UFC is not in regards to female versus male, although I do think that, how do I explain? This is hard. This is like a 30-minute, conversation really. I do think that there are subconscious beliefs that the fan base wouldn't want it, I guess is the point. Like, just that a predominantly male fan base would not love hearing a woman call 7 hours worth of fights. And I don't know if that's true or not. I really don't know if that's true. The tiny little experiment that I was able to do calling fights for LFA, I was so nervous to go to Twitter after that first card and the second card and the third card. But it's been overwhelmingly positive. That being said, I know that the LFA fan base is a Fight Pass fan base, which is already familiar with me and is also like a specific type of fan, I guess the real niche, like hardcore fan. So I don't know, but to answer your original question, no, I have not heard any conversations about current or former female fighters being targeted for that role.
Can I I'd love to hear Fernanda. We've talked about this, your ideas on kind of females, not only broadcasting, but media. And there is Angela Hill, does a great job as she does the analyst work at ESPN. But Fernanda, we're going to start with you. And, I'd love to know more about just, being a woman in MMA 2021. And also about your year where you've had major changes in the space and how you've stayed the course.
I wouldn't say I have stayed the course. I wouldn't say I'm thriving currently, depending on your standards for that. Okay, I'll start a little bit taking it back to what Laura was saying about this sort of not necessarily conscious idea that maybe the fan base wouldn't want a woman in certain roles. And I sort of experienced that firsthand when I was working as a producer doing television, not obviously for the UFC in Brazil. And personally, this is something that happened to me. I was trying to do a translation for the events because we had a translator at the time, obviously a lot of English speakers, and we didn't have an actual hired translator to do that normally. It was a person from the channel who happened to speak English. And I was like, well, I happen to speak English and I happen to know MMA and I'm here. So I guess that makes sense. We did a test. Apparently I did well at the test. They told me to show up one day and I studied and showed up and they wouldn't let me do it that day. I was like, okay, maybe it's a bureaucratic thing, right? And then just I kept pushing and pushing. I wasn't going to get paid more to do it. It was just something like I was going to show up there on Saturday nights and just do this extra thing because at the time I wanted to break into commentary. It was a goal I had. It's not a goal I have anymore. But it was something that I was interested in. And I was thinking, well, maybe this is a way of me to, get my voice out there, get familiar with the whole thing. And it never happened. And then later I would hear that, nobody said it to me flat out, but the rumblings were that, they wouldn't be comfortable hearing a woman speaking during an entire broadcast. And that was like pretty disheartening and at the same time entirely unsurprising because that was kind of what I thought was happening. So this is kind of the things you get used to after a while, and you sort of have to trust your work and trust yourself. And at the same time, and it's very hard, at least for me personally, to not get super discouraged because one thing I always try to explain to my male colleagues, the well-meaning ones who actually want to understand more of my point of view, is that the hardest part of this business, in which I personally have been super fortunate. I've had editors who believed in me. I worked with amazing male counterparts. I've had, amazing opportunities and doors open to me. So I can't really complain. But one thing I always try to sort of explain is just that it's hard to feel like my opinion is worth less automatically, like that I have to convince people more than a man in the same position has to. And I think a lot of men don't realize that happens because it doesn't happen to them. I think a lot of men don't think that happens, then disagree and think that I'm just saying things to sound like a victim. And that's yet another thing about the experience. Whenever you say something, well, this happens to me because I'm a woman, you know, a lot of people are going to think, no, this has nothing to do with it. It happens to everyone. There's nothing to do with gender. So many layers to it, which we have discussed in our several panels and several experiences. But that to me is just kind of what I always try to get through when I talk about this, the experience of being a woman in this or any field. It's just like, try to imagine feeling like you need to extra prove what you can do and extra prove how much you know, and just give your opinion extra weight, and just be very careful, because one slip from you is 10,000 times worse than a slip from a male counterpart. Because when people are just ready to discount you, that's what happens. So that it's a broad term, as we know, just the experience. And it's what I try to talk about in my podcast and when I interview all you guys, because I think I've had you all in my podcast at some point. It's just kind of through experience and through just saying, well, this happens. Like this is a person saying, this is me and this happened to me. Maybe like this will make people pay a little more attention to what the experiences are. As for the COVID part, I'm trying to break Luke's and Brett's record today. As for the break that glass ceiling, women can talk a lot too. But as for the COVID part of it, I think that all of us had to adjust in different ways. In many ways, I'm very fortunate in that, you know, I don't have kids, so I didn't have to worry about that part of it, or taking care, you know, having kids that would be at school at home and things like that. So my work life hasn't really had to change that much. But at the same time, we work in a very volatile industry. We all know that. And it became more volatile last year. I think a lot of us, when Luke mentioned the sort of fragility in the relationship between media and fans at the time, when we were being quite critical of the UFC's decisions, because at the time there wasn't a lot of transparency about protocols and everything else. I think a lot of us had this sort of we're angry because it's kind of like, no, this is not good for us that the UFC might not happen for months. This is terrible. None of our jobs are good. There's no benefiting from this. So it became more volatile for all of us. And obviously Dan and I were working for the Athletic at the time, full time. And our team got dissolved halfway through the year. So we had this dream team and had achieved this amazing professional goal, I think, for all of us to be able to work in such a great atmosphere. And then it was like, nope. So that was one rug pulled from under us. And then, you know, I think the same things as everyone else, not having live events, not being able to travel, not being able to interview people live, not being able to, you know, get out to get inspired. For us writers, I mean, we all know we all have our processes, but like being locked in, being in a room, all of this is like major adjustments creatively, you know, just in terms of getting stuff done, in terms of getting inspired, in terms of wanting to write things or to think about things. Because I think, I would guess all of us have dealt with some kind of gloom or at least mild depression throughout this whole process. I know I went through a pretty severe one after the thing with the Athletic. So yeah, there's all of this to say I landed on my feet. I got very lucky. I had great opportunities. I had another opportunity lined up. Things have been working out very well for me. I've been very fortunate, but I wouldn't say I've been thriving. No, I don't think a lot of people can say that. And that's absolutely okay. We're all going through a very horrible thing and very traumatic. And I think we're all allowed to like kind of just not be very okay with the whole thing.
So Fernanda, I don't want to kind of go back and rub in that time period about the Athletic, but we talked about the Apex, which may be the high point of this COVID year. Dan Stupp, we're going to talk more about the demise of the MMA team, the horror that all of us felt when we woke up on that June morning. So Dan, and actually Julie, do you want to take this one? Because you've interviewed with Dan, you've done work. So why don't you take this?
I'd be happy to, but you know, I kind of ramble myself, and I cannot get this out of my mind. I'm so sorry, Dan, and this is just how I operate. But to the people who think women's voices shouldn't be heard, the first female doctor in the United States, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, said, public opinion is meant to be made, not followed. So we should make public opinion. That's our job. Anyway, Dan, returning to you and the horribly depressing thing that happened with the Athletic. That was heartbreaking, actually, just to see that, because I really enjoyed that team so much. So in the first MMA symposium, I wasn't a part of it, so I'm reading, sorry. No, I'm just reading off a script, so I might get this wrong. But Tanisha Singleton asked you, or
no, it was me. I'll just say it.
Oh.
I'll read this part and then we'll change over.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. So I started back in December 2019. Seems like a minute ago, right, Dan? Nothing happened really. I started, when I started questioning you, I said that it's fair to say that The Athletic, your publication at the time, produces the best long-form essay style in MMA coverage. And I would very much loved all the work and everything. But I also asked you about the challenges, and Julie, I'll just take this one, and then you'll continue with the sports betting if you don't mind. But what were the challenges you foresaw with subscription paywall rather than a clicks or ad? Obviously, 2020 tested us all in some ways. So can you tell us about what was going on in The Athletic? And is it possible to have a subscription publication, or was this the force of nature that doomed it, and can it happen?
Yeah, I think at the time, The Athletic laid off about 10% of the staff. And, we kind of knew the writing was on the wall. We saw other MMA sites either laying off people or doing mandatory furloughs or just not renewing contracts. And, we had been getting warnings kind of from the top that, The Athletic could possibly do that. And just being the editor and being on the back end, I know just performance-wise, MMA, it was low man on the totem pole. And no matter where I've worked, MMA has always kind of been, the stepchild that nobody, I think they think it's going to be kind of an intro to this young male audience, and that they're rabid fans, and they are, but they're not necessarily rabid fans for subscription content that's written really well and tells a great story when you've got, Conor McGregor tweets that you could be writing about instead. So I knew it was going to be kind of a challenge for us, because MMA may be big or getting bigger, but it's a niche sport. And when you look at the fan base, there's niches within that niche sport. And when you start divvying it up like that, the niches can be just politically, ideologically, just completely different from each other. I mean, we've seen it, but it's just not a huge number of fans or potential subscribers to sustain something like that. And obviously, we had a pretty big staff, and we weren't cheap, and we traveled. And so I don't know. I think there is room for subscription stuff. I think we're seeing kind of the new way to do it. I look at like Ben Folks and Chad Dundas, who do the Co-Main Event podcast. And thank God that they didn't sell it to the Athletic when we were kind of putting the team together. I know the Athletic really wanted to kind of have it under their umbrella, and I think Chad and Ben knew that this is something we own, and if everything else goes wrong, at least we have this. And I feel kind of stupid now. I was one of them initially. I wanted them on the staff so bad. Not that I tried to talk them out of that, but I wasn't really listening to what they were saying then. And looking back, it's like, thank God that they did hang on to that. And we're seeing it now. Chuck Mendenhall, one of the guys we worked with at The Athletic, his personal Patreon supported podcast with Sean Alshate. I think you're never going to be everything to everyone, especially within such a diverse group of fans like MMA. But I think you can find an audience, and the bonus of that is that you're now writing for and interacting with the people you really care about, that aren't making your life more difficult or making you I know Fernando, we dealt with this at the Athletic, kind of make you reconsider what you're doing with your life. Like, is this really what I want to do? Who I want to spend my days with? And thankfully at the Athletic, we kind of got away from that, coming from MMA Junkie, which could just be completely toxic, with the readers and fan base sometime. But anyway, I know I'm rambling, but yeah, I think even MMA, a sport as small and as fragmented as MMA, there's a potential future for subscription, but it's never going to be huge numbers. You really got to find the right people you want to cater to.
RIP. Julie, do you want to talk about Dan's new venture?
I do. So you've made the move into sports betting content coverage with it's Play Virginia, right? Right. So as somebody who I was involved with Bodog fights, and so I saw kind of some of the relationships between betting sites and MMA. What do you think is different about Play Virginia in terms of, I mean, it's not forming a league, but what has that experience been like for you with Play Virginia? How do you see that as compared to other kind of betting sites with MMA when you're doing content coverage? And like, it's one of the biggest advertisers, right? Like right now, it's getting really like Jamie Foxx is everywhere. So do you think that's going to have an effect on MMA media? Is that going to bring in a kind of a new wave of MMA media, or there's a lot in that question? I can't find my glasses, you guys.
No, I think, I'm kind of just covering the industry, and obviously it's a very interesting industry as more and more states legalize sports betting, and as these sportsbook operators come online. I think for at least the next few years, Virginia came online earlier this year. And like you mentioned, the Jamie Foxx ads, like you can't watch a TV show now without half the ads being sports books and affiliated stuff. It's going to be that way for the next few years. And I think we're going to see a lot of it in MMA, just because that's where money's being spent. And if you're going after a young male audience, a captivated one who's clearly into sports, I think the sports books are going to be a huge kind of subsidizer of MMA coverage, just because whatever the big thing is at the time, they seem to find their way to MMA. It's sports books, digital currency on a smaller thing, man groomers. I mean, if you have an octagon shaped frozen food, obviously MMA is the place that you're going to pitch that. But I think MMA is always going to be like that. Right now, it's sports books, whatever the next big thing is. They'll probably get their feet wet in MMA. It's a cheaper barrier to entry. You can, at least back in the day, you could sponsor a fighter a lot easier. But you can even get on a major, national broadcast pretty inexpensively. So I think the sports books realize that very quickly, and they're going to be around for at least another few years. So we'll be seeing a lot of that kind of mixed in with the MMA coverage.
All right. No
follow up, Nancy. I'm so sorry.
Please.
Follow up. So Dan, in what ways do you, I guess, curate your content? Like what becomes different about the way you're writing now as opposed to, or is it completely the same? Like what is it content wise that you do differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different. I went from pretty much 95% editing and 5% writing to 95% writing and 5% editing. I will say it's not my dream job to be covering the sports betting industry in Virginia, but it's definitely a dream company that I work for now, Katina Media. I think if anything, just the pandemic stuff with MMA Junkie and the Athletic, and looking at it now, I realized my goal should be to find a good company, a good job, one that cares about just kind of your health and well-being. I mean, it's amazing how the company I work for now cares about that stuff, and they understand. They said it's because we get better work out of it. We become a stronger company when we have happy employees, which sounds ridiculous that you would have to stress that, but I think all of us have probably worked for companies in the past, especially in MMA media, where one, you wondered if you had a job, if you were going to get paid, what kind of ridiculous compromise. You were going to have to just ethical, journalistically, and that you were going to have to make. And kind of getting out of that is nice. But working in a company now that has a lot of websites like Play Virginia, Play Tennessee, Play Indiana, it is nice to be kind of the MMA guy. If people have a question, kind of all the writers will be writing about big sportsbook promotions ahead of UFC 260 this weekend. But if, something as simple as how do you pronounce Francis Ngannou's last name to why is this such a big fight? It's nice to be known as the MMA guy who can help with stuff like that. But so yeah, that's a long-winded answer to a long-winded question. So
we love it. We love to overthink and overanalyze and hear it. So thank you, Dan. I want to get in a few more questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience here and students who I'm putting it on gallery view for all those on YouTube because I wanted to see everyone. Charles Disco, I really want to bring you in to focus more on regional MMA. Getting here to my question, because as a combat sports gym owner and commentator for these scenes, can you tell us what's going on, first of all? What have been the financial effects? And then just, I think we kind of started talking about this, what is going to be kind of longstanding because of this pause?
So, like most things in life, my timing was not that great when I opened the gym. And we moved to a new location, I think it was February 15th of 2020. So a month later, we closed for COVID. And then we stayed closed, I think, until August. So right off the bat, I can tell you financially, it was a disaster. We spent a lot of money moving. We lost a lot of money when we were closed. And just prior to closure, we were at like just about 150 members, which is pretty good. And then when we reopened in August, I think we were down to 61, right? So significant drop off. And just in general, it really put us in a jam. But thankfully, I think we actually got a little bit of the trickle down from the UFC being the sole sport that was out on TV that everybody was watching, because we got an outrageous amount of signups. I mean, we had more signups from August to, we'll just say, the end of February than we did in the entire 3.5 years prior to opening, prior to that relocation. So sure, some of that is due to the new location. It's much better, floor to ceiling windows. You guys know the drill. But I think by and large, people were just kind of ready and willing. And I think they kept seeing it on TV, and I think they just wanted to try it. I mean, we've had so many new folks. So what started as a disaster financially ended up quite good. From the competitive side, though, this is a little bit interesting because I do commentary, I train some fighters, I coach some guys, pro and amateur. And for somebody who's got, I would say, like a higher level prospect, they're traveling right now all over wherever there's fights. I've had guys fight in Arkansas. One this past weekend was actually in Michigan. Another one was in Austin, Texas. But nothing is really happening in the DC, DMV, but really I would say like the entire Northeast. The only one I know of has been CFFC in Philadelphia, and they're at a very specific arena, the 2300 arena, I think it's called. And they have some sort of deal worked out that allows them to keep the show going. But in general, the athletic commissions, at least in the DMV, have said that they're not even going to take a meeting until Q3 2021, which usually means that you're probably not going to get a meeting until Q4, and you might not have an event until the start of 2022. So this is just, I mean, for local talent, it's a big problem. I mean, for amateur levels, I think it doesn't affect them quite as much. And for promising professionals, they could kind of reevaluate and, like I said, travel. But for guys who are, let's say, 32 years old, they're 9-6, maybe they got one more run in them, maybe they got a couple late notice opportunities, but they can't train. They can't get the conditioning they need. They're basically on lockdown. These guys are now missing out on opportunities that might have otherwise changed their lives. And I think that's the part that's really I don't like to use words like heartbreaking, but that's just the most devastating to their individual careers where, by the time they get out of this, it might be 18, 19 months since they last fought. Now they're in their mid 30s and they might be looked over for somebody who's on the other side, right? Who's coming up now into their prime, who was taking that time to develop. And maybe they're 2-0 and they want to see what's going to happen if they continue their pro career. But before I finish that question, I did want to say that there has been some positive though too, especially in regards to pro fighters who I think probably deserved an opportunity, but just for some reason weren't getting it. A couple guys who come to mind: Brandon Royval, Johnny Castaneda, Gustavo Lopez. I knew all these guys from Combate, so there's a little bias there, but I think all of them were very much world class, and I think they've been ready for quite some time. Johnny even fought and won on the Contender Series, and the pandemic actually afforded them that opportunity to get a roster spot and start competing there. So I think for most, it's been a really tough time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about how this has been life-changing for some folks in a very positive way too.
Can I add to that real quickly?
Please.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's going to be a very fascinating summer too. I can't say too much, but I know that there are some concerns, at least with Contender Series, have to have 10 weeks. It's 5 fights every week. It's 10 weeks in a row. And with as many fights as fall off, recently, I'm fascinated to see with fewer regional shows functioning. I know there's concern about can we fill up this Contender Series as well as have, the Ultimate Fighter running previous to that as well. So I personally hope that the guys that you just described that maybe would have been looked over for the Contender Series as well, because they're looking for a very specific type of fighter. I hope that some of those guys and gals, I shouldn't say guys, I use that term generally, find their way to the Contender Series as well and have that opportunity to fight right in front of Dana, because maybe that 9-6 record, would have gotten you put in another stack of papers immediately last year. This year, you might get looked at if you have an exciting fighting style. So I'm hopeful that it's sort of like last minute opportunities are allowing guys that would have had the chance before and more so for the Contender Series as well. So that was just my 2 cents there.
I love that. I love your 2 cents. Okay, before we go, we have some questions from the audience and including students. I have to ask this question, and Laura, because you're talking about the summer, the spring, UFC 261. Tickets go on sale like tomorrow, probably, right? For the UFC Fight Club. And then probably on Friday. I am having my brain can't take this in. It's going to be no restrictions, full capacity. I'm knowing that we're still getting vaccinations. Are there going to be protocols for the fighters' health? And we think of that as a large crowd, which we haven't had large crowds. So
I will say, so I'm speaking slightly off turn, out of turn here, but I will give you what I know, and that is that as a broadcaster, we're going to be subject to the same bubble restrictions that we've had going to fights in Las Vegas. So I have to test at home, and then I actually have to fly out a day earlier for Florida than I would have if I was going to Las Vegas. So I know that they are taking extra precautions, and that what I'm describing will also apply to the fighters. So that same bubble, the bubble is basically picking up and moving for fighters, broadcasters, people within the company. For fans, obviously it's a different case scenario. I also just came from 7 days in Florida, and while Florida is open, you still need to wear a mask pretty much everywhere you go. Maybe they're not smacking people on the side of the head if they don't have one on, or if it's not covering their nose, but people are abiding by that by and large. So I would imagine that while there may not be, sections roped off, I would imagine that masks are still going to be required. And I think that people will probably be still, respectful of space and washing their hands and taking precautions more than they would have maybe 2 years ago. It's maybe a controversial stance, but I do think, I don't know, COVID experiences have been varied across the United States, because I'm always fascinated to hear my East Coast cohorts talk about gyms being shut down. And I know that the experience of someone who lived in New York during the last year and a half is very different than the experience I've had living in Kansas City, Missouri for the last year and a half. Because if I'm being honest, we didn't really shut down ever, and the gym never shut down. And we've life has been different, but it's not been drastically different. And I was never confined to my house. So it's just interesting and honestly eye-opening for me and helpful for me too, always to have these conversations with people who live in different parts of the United States. Because if you're in California or New York, your experience with this whole thing is very different than what the Midwest experience has been.
Very true. Very true. Luke, can I ask your opinion on this? As someone from DC, where we're, have been very restricted and haven't had that experience. What do you feel about this live sporting event, full capacity?
Yeah, I don't really know what to say about it. I don't know what I don't know what to say anymore. I said this on Morning Combat. I'll just repeat it here, which is basically that, like, look, the first time the UFC was trying to get going before the first Florida show, there were some fits and starts that we had a debate about that. But then since they followed COVID protocol, it's been, great. They deserve a pat on the back for how well they have executed. And Florida, I think, is a very controversial topic with COVID protocol and policy. Are they cooking their books on their numbers? Is it better than people think? Derek Thompson in The Atlantic just today had a whole piece on how everybody has been wrong about Florida. So on the one hand, you want to feel like you got to have some humility about this. And maybe in a month, there'll be a lot more vaccinations. Duval County is not Miami-Dade. Maybe people will wear masks. Like, to go out and just declare this will be a disaster, I think that is premature. I really do. You just got to have some epistemic humility about it all. But I think the other reality is, like, do I think this is best practices? Like, no, I think it's imprudent at best. So I think we should all probably just wait and see. But I would really like us to be in a place where we were a little bit closer to bringing the coronavirus to heel, and then public ordinances changing. But it's not the world we live in, so let's see what happens.
Thank you. I love, having these voices, different opinions. This is what the academic space is all about. And we're going to go to my students. Sevi, will you just introduce yourself, say where you're from, and ask the panel your question?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sevi Horton. I'm a freshman at American University from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I'm a member of one of Professor Cater's classes. So I have a question for all the current or former female fighters in the call. I'm in the process of writing a paper on transgender fighters in the UFC. And I was wondering kind of your take on the issue. Specifically, I was wondering if you feel comfortable fighting transgender women that were born biologically male, and just why or why not.
Thank you. Bringing in some great questions. Who would like to start?
Julie, I'll let you start this one off.
Oh, mute.
Oh man, I'm having a hard time with technology today. I have not fought since 2013. So me weighing in on this is me weighing in with an attitude of, looking back, hell yeah, I would fight anybody. And a transgender woman is biologically a woman. That's what science says, in my opinion. I am not as fully educated on transgenderism and the science behind it as I could be. I feel as though we learn as the years go by and as we test things out and as we try things, and I don't think people should not have opportunities. Fallon Fox was a transgender, I think she's retired now, but she was a transgender MMA fighter who got a lot of negative attention. And during the time, and I'm going to get my years all mixed up here, but during the time that she was an active fighter, I don't know that I was as supportive as I could have been. And so out of ignorance, and out of just not knowing, not really understanding the diverse scale of human biology and, but also Fallon Fox, a female fighter who is transgender, lost to somebody who was born female. So I think that that's something to keep in mind when it comes to MMA and sports in general. I don't think it just comes down to chromosomes. I think there's a lot more going on there, and I think there's a lot more we need to learn I know that there is at least one or two very famous transgender fighters in Thailand, Thai boxers. And if you're looking to write a paper, I would look into maybe studying some of the Thai boxers. I think Lady Boy is the one who comes to mind right away, and I don't say that pejoratively. That was the fight name that she fought under. So to answer your original question, yes, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but I'm also old and out of shape and in no way going to be fighting again anytime soon. But I can say that no, I don't have a problem with it. I wouldn't have a problem fighting a transgender female fighter.
I am also old and out of shape. I will echo that sentiment. You're not out of shape, Julie. Here's what I will say about this. It's such a complicated issue because the part of me that wants everyone to have equal opportunity in everything, and the part of me that man just like feels for the bravery that transgender people have to really do about anything in life, let alone participate in a combat sport. There's that part of my mind that is like, man, I'm so supportive of this, and I so admire people who are willing to go out on a limb and do something that is so potentially controversial and fraught with bringing negativity their way. I mean, you have to cheer for those people. However, and like this is, I feel like I have to couch this too. I don't know enough about the biology involved, and I think that's kind of where we need to start. Like, if we could somehow bring science into the equation and have an understanding of whether this idea that there are perceived advantages physiologically being born male and then, later transitioning to a female, which is the type that we are talking about. We're not talking about, females going to male. If those perceived advantages really do exist or not. I mean, we test women for levels of testosterone. I think that it's obvious to the naked eye that some women are born with varying levels of testosterone. There are some women who are, when they work out, they get jacked shoulders and like walk around and they look very physically athletic. There are women like me, I might even throw Paige Van Zandt in this book, who I can lift all day long. I am never going to look muscular. I don't know this. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. But to me, that speaks to a biological difference between women as a whole who are born as women. So there have to be differences for the transgender individuals as well. So I guess to wrap up my thought, I'm not against it. I would like there to be science behind it that would follow the safety protocols that we've put in place already for individuals. And I think some of that would have to be, would need to be looked at. There's variety already, I'm sure, in bone density and things like that. And there certainly are differences in hormonal levels. So if we can have an understanding of once you break a certain barrier of when does something become an advantage and not, then that makes it about science and not about some sort of weird morality, which it should not be about.
Thank you so much.
Now, so I know we have 2 minutes left, but I'm going to say if anyone wants to stay after and just kind of continue the discussion, I'll be here and we can keep going. But I do want to thank everyone for coming together, giving me your time, and Julie are giving both of us this time to have this discourse. Because a lot of times these are the questions that we have, but they're not being asked. And we really would like to know what's going on behind the scenes, as well as how it's affecting society and culture. Any final words? Esther.
I have a question actually for Charles regarding local MMA and actually everyone else too, in a weird way. In California, for sure, we had we had a huge amateur MMA scene here, and that died completely when COVID came through. And so one of the things, I did talk to some local fighters and up-and-coming fighters, and my husband trains, and I know lots of coaches, and they said that it was getting very difficult to find fights for up and comers, and it's like, you're expected to be able to, before even attempting to go to Contender Series or to Ultimate Fighter, you should have a winning record. You have to have a certain number of fights. And for sure, this last year, it was if you lived in a big city, that was impossible to do. So I'm curious what you think about, and all of a sudden, there's been this has been around for a long time, but things like street beefs and these underground fight clubs have been kind of exploding. What do you think about this kind of like incursion? And it basically just looks like bad amateur MMA most of the time. But I mean, I just wanted to know what people thought about all these, like, rise of all these, backyard squabbles, all these different companies that just suddenly decided, hey, we're just going to have our bodega fights, I think is one, like, people just decided to start a bunch of fight clubs, and what that means for, I guess, the future of, amateur MMA or prospects.
Yeah, well, I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't know a couple of people who actually went and did street beefs. It's not. I wasn't there like cornering people though, so I should clarify. I don't think that's something that's here to stay, right? We have a absence of opportunity for these guys who, at the amateur level, a lot of people just fight because they just want to, right? As opposed to fighting because now it's their career. And when you want to do something, you're going to find a way to do it. And the regulations and professionalism that normally would go into that doesn't quite seem as important anymore, right? So if the athletic commission is not going to go to bodega fights or street beefs, but the guy who's going to fight in an athletic commission regulated event still will do that. He's probably thinking, I got to get my reps in, I got to get that feeling. Sometimes I'm at a location where maybe they're not sparring hard enough. I could tell you, even at my gym, when things opened up, people started sparring a lot harder, just in general. And I think when there's no outlet for that competitive drive, you start getting more competitive with your training partners. So I don't know if that answered your question too well, but I can tell you, I was talking to a matchmaker out on the West Coast. I was trying to make something happen, mainly just to do more commentary. And he told me that, like the East Coast, it still might be a ways away before they can get some consistent, regulated mixed martial arts promotions going there. So unless you got a big ticket, unless you have like a big TV deal that you're not dependent upon ticket sales, we might be seeing more of bodega fights, Esther.
Wow. So does everyone know about this? These underground?
Well, I don't know how underground, right? I mean, it's on YouTube.
They're on YouTube, so yeah.
Yeah.
But they don't tell you where they're located, or supposedly.
Right. Fascinating. Well, there are some more people. Brian, are you here? Brian Siskin, tell us about where you're coming from and your question.
Hey, by the way, this is sort of like this has been my quarantine therapy group, just a larger version of it. This has been great. Thank you for doing this, Nancy. I hope I don't associate forever this grid with sort of psychological trauma, but all good. Thank you so much for doing this. My question was really actually for you, Dan, probably more than anyone, which was just about, right before all this really blew up, one of the saddest things about the athletic exploding when it did was that you had just had your sort of tendrils into the fighter data survey, and that was, to me, a really landmark thing, especially now in the era of whatever post-truth world that we're in now, to have this bedrock of fighter supplied data that you can mix and match and look at from various perspectives. We never really got to see the full breadth of what was going to sort of come out of that. So I guess my question was, did you steal that Excel spreadsheet by chance? Or if not, are there any, collectively, I guess to everyone, it's involved in MMA journalism, it's, that seemed like such a strong way to start, to really let them, the Chuck Mendenhalls and the other really find these brilliant narratives and apply the construct of story to the truth. And so I guess I just wonder what if anywhere is more of, like, where's more of that? Let's get more of that. I know it was
Yeah, it's funny. I was working on the final story of the series when all my company access just went dead, including the access I had to the Google Documents, which had all the poll results. And they told us we were having a meeting coming up, and I was like, oh shit, I just got laid off. And then got 4 or 5 texts or from other people in the company. It's like, I think I just got laid off. I was like, oh, cool, me too. That's awesome. So no,
it's a fun day at the office.
yeah, it was wonderful. But no, the good thing is I think we squeezed out kind of all the big main stories that we felt we got out of it. There were definitely a few that we would have liked to follow up on. We had started tentatively talking maybe for the next year doing a similar survey with just retired fighters. I thought that would have really kind of, and that would have been geared less obviously on the fight night experience and more just on finances and health, and especially brain health. I thought it was going to be really telling, and unfortunately we never got that chance. But I mean, the good thing, like I said, is I don't feel like there was a story that we kind of uncovered that we didn't get published out of it, which was a good feeling. But there's definitely a lot more we probably could have done, and especially if we did kind of a new version of the survey. And I really wish someone had the time and resources and kind of motivation to do more projects like that, because as someone who's covered the sport for 15 years and honestly was getting really burned out, especially before I got to the athletic where we kind of had the resources to do that stuff. But I think we saw it with fans and readers too. It kind of re-energized them just to come across something new and to learn some new stuff. I mean, it's like, you know, a few weeks ago, we had the big illegal knee. And I remember going back to one of the survey questions was, which of these 15 fouls or possible fouls, you know, do you think should be legal? And knees to the head of a down opponent was one of the main ones. I mean, granted, shots to the groin, like 3 or 4% wanted that as well. And hair pulling, I think was 3 or 4%. There's some wackos out there, but again, it tells such good stories when we get to do stuff like that. And it was a big undertaking, but I'm glad we got it done as much as we could before the bottom fell out.
Yeah.
Can I weigh in a little bit on the
yeah
interrupt? Yeah, just because obviously I was in the project with Dan, and Dan was very enthusiastic about it from the start. I'll be the first to admit I wasn't as enthusiastic when the idea first came up, because we knew it was a lot of work. And that to me is the main thing now. Like, we were very fortunate in that we had a big team with people with amazing contacts and sort of the stability in the industry that the people we reached out to, they were able to talk to us. Of course, we all talked to people who maybe we didn't know before, but we all had like in our pockets fighters that, you know, we trusted and trusted us, that we knew were going to give us, you know, honest answers and really help. And it took time and resources, and we had that liberty because of the system that we were working in. So I think that, you know, that's hard to replicate in other scenarios, because as we know, the big MMA sites are really having to churn out content all the time. It's a lot of about the news. We had the luxury of time and sort of being able to distribute and people who were invested in the project, right? Because all of us were in it. But I was just after it all, like I was just fascinated, because even though I think we talked to 170 fighters, I'm still using a lot of that in my stories. Like Dan said, every time something happens, there's data that we can pull from there. All of us, I think, have had experiences where we know things about fighters that they'll tell us off the record that they won't tell us on the record for various reasons. And to be able to kind of compile that, a lot of, I think, some of our impressions might have gotten confirmed, but I, for one, can say I learned a lot of new things. And it was just so valuable to have that sort of database. And now that, you know, we are having more stories about fighters, like Dan was talking about retired fighters, obviously the recent story with Spencer Fisher. Is that, am I confusing? Yeah. And, you know, we're discussing more the afterlife of fighters, and we're discussing more all these things. And this is just such a valuable tool for that, because we have the fighters who might not be comfortable saying, yeah, I don't know, I might be dealing with some brain damage or some mental issues that might have to do with my fighting, but we'll say that off the record. So all of this to say that I just think that it's it's really cool and sad that that was our parting gift, because we were really excited about it. Like Dan said, like it was just really as it came out, and it was a project that Dan spearheaded and championed from the beginning. But I think that ultimately we all were very proud of. And then to have things, and after that, it was really sad. But at the same time, I think it's really cool that this is something we got to put out. And as hard as it is to replicate, I do hope that, another team or is able to sort of to keep those efforts going, because it really is an important document.
So you're saying though, Nanda, you're saying you actually stole the spreadsheet, is what I heard you say, right?
I might have documents about, no, we were very worried about privacy. That was one of our concerns, like from the absolute get-go, because obviously the one thing we didn't want happening was fighters who really trusted us with that information to have that leaked. So I kind of like erased everything. All I have that I know of, maybe in some crevice of my computer, but like that I know of, I deleted everything because I didn't want to risk any of it coming up.
Of course. But thank you, and I appreciate the answers.
I'm wondering on this, if I could weigh in, the example that you set with that spreadsheet and just with the amount of research, if anybody in MMA, or if I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not a journalist, I'm definitely not an information person, but wants to do or is curious about COVID's effects on fighters and long haulers and what statistics we can get in a long-term study after we've seen active fighters this year. I think, again, there'd have to be a lot of privacy involved in that, but I do wonder, because somehow the UFC, well, MMA in general, has managed to survive this and managed to in some ways thrive through this pandemic. The after effects of that, the physical toll that it might be taking on some people, or the possibility of people finding a way, I don't know if recovery is the right word, but fighting through, I don't know enough about long haulers, but charting a path to maybe better health after COVID. Just throwing it out there.
That's a thing that we've grown, I think, a little desensitized, understandably, to. Sorry, I'm still in the conversation, because I'm so there with you, Julie. Like, I think that is so important to keep track, because we hear some fighters talking about trying to train through their illness, and it obviously not working out that well from them. I think the most obvious example is Chimaev, because it was such a it seemed like an extreme case, to the point where he kind of almost announced his retirement. He isn't retired. Apparently he just announced that he's coming back, but that it was bad enough that this super young guy who had all this momentum and tried to train through his disease wasn't able to continue training. And then now I wonder how many fighters are dealing with lingering symptoms and training through them. There has been sort of this quickness, I think, to reschedule fights after positive tests that might sort of simulate that. And, I don't know. And when I say we got a little desensitized, is I think we got so used to hearing that every week a fight is falling through due to COVID, that we might not necessarily be thinking about, okay, so what are the effects of it seems like it's just a number on like a thing written on a sheet. He got positive, he needs to stay out until he's not and we're not really thinking about what that disease will mean for that person, because what we know about COVID at this point is that really it affects people very differently. So I think that it's very important that we try to at least keep some sort of track. And I don't know the feasibility of it at this point, but it would be very interesting to sort of try to watch this as it progresses, because I really am curious to see how 1 year from now this is going to have affected the rosters.
Yeah, and the specifications of that too, right? Because fights fall through because of violating protocols, not necessarily positive tests, right? So people will, they'll violate some kind of protocol, and keeping track of that information is, I think, important too, not in finger pointing at fighters or camps or anything, but in the sense that we know that this is a fighter who actually was probably not exposed. Maybe somebody in their camp was exposed. They never tested positive. And, they can be a control group. I don't know. I feel like this is something really, really important to be for people to follow up on, and I am throwing it into the void. I don't.
I wanted to say, Julie, that I do think it, one of the best things about, for me, seeing The Athletic undertake the survey was that I just feel like there isn't enough data in general about MMA. People aren't keeping histories. One of the things that always made me sad was, as Sherdog kind of started to not be like the premier site in MMA anymore, their Fight Finder kind of fell under disrepair. And to me, it's such a big deal to have centralized databases and places you can go to look up people's records. Not only that, but they have a lot of information that's actually not on the site, that's put on the back end, which is like who reffed your fight, all these other things, and what were the exact judges' scorecards. And luckily, there are a lot of websites that have kind of stepped up and filled the void, like Topology and MMA Decisions. But I think that the lack of data sucks, because whenever we do have it, it's so great to inform our writing and our journalism with actual real experiences. So I'm really excited they did that, and I do hope that someone continues and follows up, and we continue this data collection on the sport.
As in academia, we love data. We love, and quantitative, as you're talking about, is what we don't have, as well as the qualitative. So especially, we're looking back now in some data with the boxers and their head injuries. And, I know that they're collecting some data with Cleveland, with the Cleveland Clinic UFC has a relationship with. So I think that is all good, but I'm with you. More is always better. No, I'm going to go to an alum, Atticus Crow. Tell us where you're from and what your question is. And I know some people have to leave, but I'd love to, we have a couple more questions.
Hi, I'm Atticus. I took Professor Kidder's class last spring. And I'm a sophomore at American University. So this is just kind of like a general question, I guess, with the rise of a lot of fighters dropping out and a lot of fighters, especially at the start of the pandemic, not being able to train the way they wanted to. I know this really affected British fighters. I guess, how do you think the transition from more traditional fighter recruitment, especially the Ultimate Fighter, into Dana White Contender Series, which can just pump out like 30 or 40 fighters twice a year, how do you think that has affected the UFC? And then also, do you think Dana White's Contender Series will be as influential as it is right now after the pandemic and all these dropouts we're seeing are kind of going away?
I can hop in on that if you want. I do think I do think that Dana White's Contender Series will continue to be a cornerstone of the influx of people that you see coming into the UFC. Not only because of the platform that they're provided, it's such a unique experience for those guys, but also the UFC is full of intelligent business people, and that show not only serves to tell the stories of some very interesting individuals, but you basically get a class of people entering into the UFC who the fans might know and recognize and cheer for their story. They are going to be at the entry stage bracket of fighter pay, and you may end up with some real stars out of that. You may not, and that's okay. But it's a fascinating business model. So I do think it will remain important. What will be interesting to see is this season, right? Because I can honestly say that even last season, before COVID, it wasn't before COVID, but before COVID really was the long-term effect for these fighters. Because at that point, many of them had still recently fought and probably were maintaining some amount of training, maybe. There was a bit of a fall off in terms of the type of fighter that you saw on Dana White's Contender Series, but I would even say that from season one as well. That's I think MMA as a whole, and that is how big the UFC is getting, how big Bellator is getting, and how big ONE is getting, and how many fights you're seeing these organizations collectively put out on a week to week to week to week basis. And then when you add in on top of that all of these short notice replacements, it does create very interesting economies. And I don't like to think of fighters as some sort of economic currency, but if you look at it that way, they kind of are. And I think it puts a premium on a fighter who is willing to, kind of step in their last minute notice. I don't know that that's always ideal, but I guess to answer your question, I do think Contender Series will continue and will be important. We might see a different type of fighter. I know that Tough is coming back. I don't know details about coaches or anything like that, but it's going to be an interesting summer for sure.
And just to add on to that, if I can, I think that the biggest detriment you'll see to the talent pool is really going to be more at the regional level as opposed to the highest levels, because the UFC, look, they have the power, right? They got the juice. Everybody wants to go there. So they'll still attract the very best talent that's available, regardless of the situation. Mm-hmm. But what will happen, and Laura kind of got into this a little bit, that you'll have guys who are jumping out of, let's say, maybe LFA. She's no longer commentating them. That replacement for that guy in LFA might not be up to that standard. He might be a little bit less. And sure, you could definitely see that in a Contender Series as well because of the nature of that business model. But it's really that regional MMA where you're going to see guys who maybe they're fighting for like the CFFC title and they've had 7 fights instead of 17 fights and things like that.
I would agree with that. I won't keep talking. I feel like I've taken this over, but you're absolutely right. Even like the last LFA card that I called, we were talking about the production meeting where like we were having more pro debuts than we had ever seen before. Now they're good guys, are qualified. A lot of them have a collegiate wrestling background, but you're definitely seeing sort of the trickle down effect of what you were just describing, Charles, for sure. And with that, I gotta go, guys. I'm sorry.
Hi.
Great speaking with you, Laura.
Good to see you, Laura. Thank you so much.
I have a quick point on that. This is more of a, like, is it philosophically related to combat in general that you'll see, I mean, we're back to underground fights, bodega fights, as in pre-Zuffa days, right? Like we're seeing, I mean, is this some kind of cycle, maybe philosophically or something that happens with fighting where you have very, very good fights, very, very controlled fights, but once things get too controlled, something implodes and you start from scratch again, or you start from, what little there is.
Well, do you want, were you talking to me or?
Yeah,
like,
whatever. I'm
okay.
talking now.
So I was like, well, I've actually kind of noticed that specifically with bare knuckle, right? Me and Esther might be watching bodega fights, but bare knuckle has really, I feel like, exploded for what it is. And it's a little bit more raw. It's a little bit more brutal. And there's a couple of different promotions that are coming up now that are honestly taking guys who I've commentated from amateur fights who are looking to go pro. And that was something Cowboy Fights was planning on doing, right? Maybe getting some pro fights in there. So those guys who might not be fighting professionally in MMA now, they're just jumping over and they're going into bare knuckle. A few of them have done that, which to your point it's, I don't want to say like a reversion, but it's definitely more raw, right? Not quite as cooked as we'll say as like a traditional mixed martial arts product.
No, definitely. That's so great. So Brian, and then Mike, I know I have you going in there, but Brian, you have a quick question you wanted to bring in.
Yes, only the quick ones. So Esther, so we've talked a lot about, obviously writing and language and what informs all that, but you work obviously in the visual language. I'm curious about, like, for me, if I'm away from any work or type of work for a while, it's inevitable that you're going to gain some objectivity out of it and re-assimilate to it perhaps in a different way with some new tools or some new ideas or maybe new experimentations, or maybe do like the UFC where all of a sudden everything's like F1.4 when they're walking out and it's like, what is going on? So I guess I'm just curious, from your perspective, you've kind of had this detour, and I'm curious about how that's perhaps influenced your visual language or your approach.
I would say that it's made me, it's made me try to figure out how to do more remote photography. I definitely would like to figure out And especially because my own style, I would consider myself a documentary photographer. I like to stay in a room and stay there so long that I disappear and people forget I'm there, and that's how I like to shoot. And ultimately, the idea of actually getting to shoot remotely or shooting through, robotic cameras or all that kind of stuff really, for me, helps with that, the idea that we can really kind of transition into a more honest kind of, thing. But at the same time, there's that kind of like line of like privacy, right? There's some moments that you just don't want to see. And I will say that the thing that's really changed for me in the last 6 months is I have much more visceral reaction to the violence. This is something that I used to always be, obviously, because when I was cage side, if I would shoot a very bloody fight, obviously part of me is like, oh, it's very bloody. But the other part of me is like, these are beautiful photos. There's so much blood spray in the air and it's all like frozen and perfect. But now when I see a fight that's very brutal, it is very hard for me. I would like to see more. I think for me, if I do return to it, I think a lot of it is, I would like to go back to a bit more of the backstage, more kind of getting into the feelings and the actually the what happens after fights, all this kind of stuff that I don't think people get to see. And even in preparation, things like that, just the difficulty of that, weight cutting, all this stuff. I feel like we've because of COVID, we've lost that kind of more documentary style view of things, because, obviously I wouldn't be able to hang out with someone cutting weight anymore now. That's a huge danger. I can't sit in a sauna with somebody for 3 hours taking photos. That's not safe. And for me, that's kind of what I miss. And I wish I could return to that. And I think of little techniques on how I would improve that. But I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon. I get worried about that Florida event because I feel like it's just going to delay our timeline of getting back. But
Mike, this might be a good segue because thank you for bringing this up. Because we had actually a discussion in my class last week about, do you guys think, when will the athletes be getting the vaccine? Because I don't know if you guys have been talking or seen thought that possibly the Olympic athletes should be put in a higher tier, because it'll be very important to have that event. I think it's scheduled for mid-July to mid-August or something like that. But then athletes tend to be very healthy and young. Should they be getting, so I'm going to put that question, and then Mike, I want you to come in after that. But what do you guys think about that? When do you think do you think it should be pushed, or do you think it'll be May that these athletes will get vaccinated?
I have an opinion. I have no facts.
What? No, this is what we do here.
My opinion is if the promoters, if somebody wants their athlete to perform, then they should take care of them medically. And yeah, if you want them to fight on your card, then you get them vaccinated. And I say that as somebody who works for a fight promotion. I have no idea what the dealings are there because I'm a commentator. I'm not in the promotional side of it, but I do believe that if you want your athlete, then you pay for them to get vaccinated. And I understand that there's a schedule of priorities that need to be taken care of too, but because the UFC has disdained that schedule of priorities in terms of health, then everybody on that Florida card should be vaccinated at their expense.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mike, you want to share some a COVID related story.
Yeah, well, I guess even too, it's more of an open question, because last time I ever worked with Luke Thomas was the day the UFC shut down. I think it was March 16th. They postponed everything. And I was hoping to grab Luke on it, but besides the utter chaos in the radio studio while he was in DC and I was in New York, I think I struggled with, I'm just curious for everyone on the panel who's still here, how you guys adjusted, because for someone in my position who's still trying to climb the ladder in the ranks of MMA media, it's I want to take this very seriously, and I am taking COVID very seriously. It's the beginning, I was in New York City So we know how crazy it was there, and everywhere really. But I want to take it seriously, and obviously it's very real. But at the same time, like, I want to applaud the UFC for coming back, because without fights, without fighter interviews, like, I'm sitting at home staring at blank walls. So I'm just kind of curious, like, to those who are still here, like, how do you kind of walk that thin line, no matter what it is? I mean, you could use COVID as an easier example, but I think it's fighter pay. I think it's fighter medical issues. Like, I mean, the UFC did that whole like hit job on every journalist that called them out, when COVID first started. And it's like, yeah, thank God my face wasn't on there, but do I think you guys could have done things differently? Yeah. I just didn't have a big enough voice to get plastered all over the UFC. But I'm just curious to everyone who's still here. Like, I know what it was like in the immediate working with Luke. And he was just like, I don't really care what these MMA fans have to say. Like, this is the smart move. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I'm not an MMA fan. Like, I am, but this is also going to affect our livelihoods now. So I guess just open to like anyone who would be willing to take that.
I think there's, for me, like, it's constant conflict, because when the whole thing happened, I was working the first event in Brasilia when in the middle of the week they decided we weren't going to have any fans at the arena because of a government decree. And at the time we had like a press room full of people interviewing fighters, and we weren't that concerned. I can speak for myself, because at that point we didn't really know how bad things were going to get, right? Cut to the moment that we referenced earlier, where the UFC decided that it was going to resume because they wanted to be first, and the whole process was just very clumsy in the way that it was communicated. There was no effort to address security measures. There was no effort to address everything. So I think a lot of people afterward were like, oh, you're going to admit that you were wrong. No, we were not wrong. I stand by every word I said at that time. That was, at that time, that's the information we had. It was irresponsible to start doing the events again. And we needed our questions to be answered. So that was then. The UFC then decided to reopen along with other sports. They came a little earlier, but the sports world decided to go back with their protocols. The NBA did a bubble that at first it seemed to work out well. The UFC did the Fight Island bubble, which was very solid. The Las Vegas one, not so much. So at this point, I think my thing, like with myself as a human, is I can't be hypocritical and say, oh, this sucks, this is awful, because I'm still covering MMA. I still make my paycheck out of MMA. I'm still watching MMA. I'm consuming this content. My conflict is, even though the fight weeks are being conducted in a somewhat safe manner, these fighters have to train. The gyms are obviously a breeding ground for COVID. It's a sport that you can't really, it's a contact sport. It's in the name. So these people are training, they are getting infected. It became a reality of the sport. We're going to have all these positive tests, and it's just going to happen. And it's part of our collective contract that we're okay with it at this point, right? And obviously these are adults, consenting adults. They make their own decisions. We can't infantilize fighters and they don't know what they're doing, for them. These are people who are making their decisions to keep working and showing up. At the same time, we know fighters live based on the paycheck they get for each fight. There isn't a culture that encourages the saying of no's, of boundaries. So, that to me is where that's to me where the conflict is. The idea of, they're making their decisions, but it's a system that doesn't really allow fighters to collectively negotiate their terms, and they couldn't do that in the return, to turn down fights because most of them can't even afford to, right? And also the bigger thing that is, people are going back to work, things are happening, other sports are happening. What else can the UFC do? What the meaning of the word bubble, what does it even mean at this point when you have a bubble during fight week and these athletes are coming in from their own thing? We just had now Alex Volkanovski had to pull out of a fight, and that I know two people of his camp. I don't know how many at this point, but so it's not really an answer, but just to tell you that for me, it's a constant sort of conflict. What I try to do is just to never lose sight of the human aspect of it. Interestingly enough, I just recorded my podcast, and that was one of the things I'm talking to about. Just to try to not let this become about numbers, and to try not to just think of tests as this paper, and try to think that there are people involved in this, because I don't know if that's all that I can do or that I should be doing. I don't know if I should be boycotting it. I don't know or if that would do any good, but I just think that collectively, one step that we all need to do is just sit back and look and remember that we're dealing with humans, and that we all have our abilities also to change our minds, to think, and that we should and can be asking questions. Like Luke said, we don't necessarily have to think, oh, it's going to be a super spreader event and everything is going to collapse. Not necessarily, but you can ask, is this safe? Or is this reasonable? Couldn't we wait 2 months when the vaccine rollouts would have been more advanced? So, it's just, I have a lot of thoughts on that matter that I'm trying to get out, but yeah, it's for sure, like, at least for me personally, kind of a battle to deal with professional, like balancing the professional and the person in these moments.
That's been a struggle for me probably the entire time. And it definitely was a contributing factor to me wanting to get out of the business, was the conflict between us, things like fighting, you were saying, like fighting for fighter pay and things like that. We would bring these subjects up, and then you would get fans like telling us, or readers telling us, that we were trying to kill the sport, or we didn't, just things that obviously what we weren't trying to do. Because if I'm trying to shut down an event, I'm not trying to shut down an event. That means I don't have a job, when these events were getting canceled and stuff, part of me was like, I was worried about public safety, but the other half of me was like, if there are no more events for me to shoot, I'm out of work, and I think about this all the time when I'm covering MMA and about the fighters, like how at some point, how do you, I go with what Nanda said, is like, you just have to remember that they're people. And it's actually one of the things that I think attracts people to MMA and combat sports in general, is the individualism and the individual stories of each person. And, every case is going to be different. And actually, that's probably the worst thing about COVID, is the fact that the outcomes are so varied. And we're not going to know any of these things, I think, for a while, until we can go back and actually kind of look back at what's happened from, not separated from the pandemic itself. But for now, yeah, it's a huge conflict. I'm actually not sure how it's hard to go. That's probably the hardest part, I think, of being a journalist in this job, is figuring out at what point is your responsibility to the world at large, public health, to the fighter, to, there's just a lot to think about.
Esther, 100%. And Mike, I see you're going to say, but I'm glad you brought this up, Mike, because I do think that one of the reasons we have press and media is accountability. And I am so glad that you guys ask these questions, because I think that is why UFC has been so successful, is that people went and asked, okay, what are the protocols? Is UFC actually going on them? I remember Florida had that huge document, and we realized they weren't doing everything they were supposed to be doing. So in many ways, I think that Dana White, I love it, should thank the media, because it pushes him and his team, which I've heard you guys have said that the UFC, the people around him are terrific. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would just say, I guess, and I appreciate the feedback, I think it's the larger issue that looms for me, right? Because we talk about the individualism, and I know that's why I got into the sport and all the stories, and like, I want to basically be a storyteller. But for me, it's like, I think everyone who's been in the business would agree, it's something that you have to walk this fine line, right? Like, you want to ask those questions, but then you're probably going to be on a hit piece, or you might not get 5 questions at a press conference. Or to break it down even more, you may interview fighter A, and then the manager of fighter B hears you do fighter A interview, and you're just trying to get one side of a 2-fight story, or a 2-story fight. And now you're completely cut off because you asked one question. And I think that harms the sport. So I do think, like, for me, that's always been the biggest struggle. And I think it's something that, I wanted to ask, so everyone, especially your students, as he could kind of get, because like I still have to balance that struggle as well. It's like I want to ask those personal questions because they need to be asked. But when I ask this, am I about to cut off every side of this avenue for me? And I think it sucks. But I do think that these questions have helped the sport in the media side, but it's just how hard you have to kind of approach with caution in so many topics.
Well, we are over 2 hours, everyone. So Julie Kedzie, my co-chair.
I was just going to comment on that, but I think no, yeah.
Well, this would be nice. Julie, will this be the comment and wrap up?
Well, I guess the journalism is hard. For one, but I think that the story isn't actually the questions that you're asking and the struggle that you're facing, because I think that one, having access denied to you is its own story. And that's something that you should really concentrate on if you don't actually have access to the fighters. And I know it's a shitty thing. It's a poopy thing to say, because that's not a good answer. And I understand this. I work like when there's Invicta fights and I'm in the bubble, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be able to call a fight. And that there haven't been as many, and it breaks my heart. But I've also been very outspoken about COVID measures, and I've seen at least the measures that Invicta takes. I come from a family who does big science stuff. They support those measures. And they said they're good protocols. I think the UFC improved their protocols so much and so fast, and they actually did a great job. But also writing is hard. Journalism is horrible, and I think I think holding people accountable is actually part of the work. And that really sucks when you don't have access, but not having access is the story in itself. So yeah, I don't know.
That's all you need to tell. That's the final word on this MMA Media Symposium 2021. Let's hope there's not another freaking pandemic or natural disaster before the next one. But thank you all so much. It's so wonderful to see your faces.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Professor.
Hi. Thank you guys so much.